obsessed with preserving the sanctity of the Senate and it as a governing body. And then I think that kind of is a great lens to look at. So I just wanted to back up quickly, his relationship with the CIA, right? So in the 70s, he's publicly critiquing the CIA, yet is vehemently anti-whistleblower. During the Reagan era, he's publicly critiquing the CIA, yet working with them behind the scenes. So it is this privileging of personal relationships above all else with people in government and the sanctity of the entity with which he operates in, which is the Senate. And then I guess it seems like the effects outside of preserving the American empire, which is, the title of your project. I mean, that kind of is the B-side.
I mean, Emma, this is a great question and line of inquiry. I'll start with something more recent. When Barack Obama and Joe Biden get elected in 2008 and take office in 2009, there was all this pressure on Obama to go after the people who ran and operated the CIA torture program. And Obama himself, as a candidate, had railed against it. Joe Biden also, by the time he was running as vice president, Biden was very public, wants Guantanamo closed, wants CIA torture probed, wants the black sites exposed. He's calling extraordinary renditions extra-legal, extrajudicial kidnapping, just to remind people of the political context. And ultimately, Barack Obama makes a decision not to do anything to hold those CIA officers accountable for their torture. And part of the calculus, I think, in fact, the most important part of it, was that Obama realized that he would entirely lose the CIA before his administration even got started if he went after them for torture. Now, I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that was the realpolitik of that moment. Barack Obama had the living hell scared out of him when he got his first full access security briefing from the CIA after becoming the Democratic nominee, and he starts to sound very different than the Barack Obama of the general election campaign. The reason I start with that story, Emma, is because a similar thing happened to Joe Biden very early on in his Senate career. He comes in and he thinks that hammering against the CIA is a winning issue because Nixon was so lawless. Then Biden is on the Senate Intelligence Committee, one of the original members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, which was set up to oversee its actions so that Nixon-type abuses didn't happen again. And on the one hand, you have Biden sort of in a historical way condemning the CIA's misdeeds. But then in the kind of way that politics really works behind the scenes, Biden realizes that he has to work with these people and that there's a political benefit to him having access to the CIA, being able to influence policy. And so what you see in the case of, I'll give you an example, Ronald Reagan's CIA director, William Casey, one of the most notorious spies in American history, Joe Biden had his number from day one. He said, I think that Reagan, Bush, and Casey want to undo everything we did to impose restrictions and oversight on the CIA. And I'm against William Casey being CIA director. So Biden's hammering against him. And ultimately, at the end of the day, Biden votes to confirm William Casey. He still continues with this contentious relationship once Casey is CIA director. And Biden is proved prescient when the AP obtains a classified memo showing that William Casey was exploring the idea of using the CIA to do domestic spying and break-ins again. So Biden understood it. But he votes to confirm Casey, and then he picks a few issues where he has common ground with Casey and the CIA. One of them is on the issue of whistleblowers. Joe Biden comes up with this idea that there's all these leakers and whistleblowers. I support the CIA trying to stop them, people like Philip Agee, who blew the whistle on covert operations around the world. The CIA viewed this as a dire threat. Biden says, why don't we do this? Let's try to go after lawyers who represent leakers or whistleblowers and pass laws that state that they're not allowed to subpoena documents from the government as part of their defense or leakers or whistleblowers. It was called gray mailing legislation. The CIA, in now declassified documents, praises Joe Biden not only for that legislation, but for privately giving what they call the tongue lashing to the Justice Department for not going after lawyers who defend leakers or whistleblowers. Biden also collaborates with William Casey and the CIA to try to win support among other senators, Democratic senators, when the United States engages in the invasion of the tiny Caribbean nation of Grenada in 1983. Joe Biden gets a briefing from William Casey, runs to the Senate floor, meets with Barry Goldwater and a number of other senators to basically say, we need to support this, even though it's in violation of the War Powers Act. So what does Biden do? He, after the fact, says, we need to apply the War Powers Act here and make sure that we don't stay forever in Grenada. That's sort of how Biden treated it in real terms, is that he would say he wants the War Powers Act, respected. He would say he wants the CIA reined in. And then he finds these ways to work with the very forces that he claims are causing all the problems.
And what, and I want to circle back. I do have some questions about Iraq, and particularly the two sort of, wars that we waged against Iraq. But what is your sense of his calculation there? I mean, we're at the baseline is that the morality of these questions are irrelevant.
Sam may have ducked out for a little bit there.
It's okay. I can pick up on that.
Yes,
I think I know where
absolutely.
he was going, Emma. The question, like, why is Joe Biden so hawkish on Iraq? It's interesting because, a lot of people on the left, when the wars in Iraq were getting started, particularly in the aftermath of the 2003 invasion and occupation, people would say, it's all about the oil. Joe Biden himself, and we document this in the project, has acknowledged that oil and oil resources and dealing with who controls oil resources actually is one of the strategic reasons that the United States has gone to war in Iraq. And I give credit to Biden for actually speaking bluntly about that. But I think it's not just about that. I think you can take Biden's position on Iraq in the Middle East and his position on some of the wars in the former Yugoslavia in the 90s. Biden was very obsessed with the Soviet Union's collapse, resulting in Russia continuing or trying to move westward. Biden wanted to ensure that the United States moved eastward and continued to encroach upon the territory of the former Soviet Union. Oil is essential to all of that. So I think Biden's track record is one of understanding the geopolitical importance to the U.S. empire project of the flow of natural resources. But I think it's also about American prestige in the world and this idea that if the United States doesn't confront these people, no one will. Now, of course, the road of that position is filled with all kinds of hypocrisy, but I do think Biden has been more honest than other politicians at least acknowledging that oil plays a role in why the United States chose to go to war endlessly against Iraq.
Where did his desire for splitting? I mean, I think this has sort of also gone down the memory hole a little bit. That Biden wanted to split Iraq into three. That was his response I guess it was 2004, maybe 2005. And he wanted to have an independent Kurdistan. That is, we should say these are the Iraqi Kurds, as opposed to what we have in Syria. And how much of that, was there any relationship between what Bush did, George H.W. Bush did at the end of the Iraq War I, which was to encourage the Kurds in the north to rise up against Saddam Hussein and then basically say, imply that we're going to come in and support your uprising? He didn't.
Well, also the Shia in the South got slaughtered by Saddam Hussein after responding to George H.W. Bush's calls. And Biden, attacked George H.W. Bush. Even though Biden voted against the war, he attacked George H.W. Bush for not finishing the job and taking Baghdad and overthrowing Saddam.
Right. And then, so how much where did his idea of
the partition?
Yes, because that just seems to me to be sort of nuts, or what was the theory?
Well, it was, yeah. I have two thoughts on this. One, it was widely ridiculed in the Arab world, particularly among Arab historians who understand the history of Iraq and the way that British colonialism redrew the maps of the Middle East. So then you have a white imperial politician basically saying, let's partition Iraq even further.
Right.
But I actually think that this is a kind of less fascinating story than it may sound. remember that Biden he had these dramatic presidential ambitions from the moment he set foot in the U.S. Senate. He had his eyes on running for president, and his 88 campaign got utterly obliterated when Maureen Dowd and others started amplifying stories about Joe Biden plagiarizing a Labor Party politician's speeches in the UK. But remember, Sam, at this time, I'm glad that we're doing this because we live in this like Ritalin-based short attention span society where history doesn't matter unless it's the history of the last 15 minutes. Joe Biden is running against Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama for the Democratic nomination in 2008. And that campaign started like years early. Biden realizes that Obama is going to capture the kind of anti-war sentiment a la, Howard Dean 2004.
Right.
And so he wants to come up with what he thinks is like a bold idea that's going to differentiate him from his fellow Iraq war hawk, Hillary Clinton, and also portray Barack Obama as sort of naive. So Biden digs into like this crazy notion of partitioning Iraq. I think it was purely political advisors and others sitting there with Biden and saying, what big idea can we come up with to set ourselves apart from the field? And it was a catastrophe. I mean, it was ridiculed by everyone. It had no legs. There was no chance that was going to become the U.S. position. But I don't think it's as deep as it may sound. I really think it was a political move involving consultants and others. And Biden said, well, I'm a big thinking guy. I'm a major part of what we did in Bosnia. Breaking that place up and into, ethnic states. That was a good idea, which by the way, we can talk about that. That was an insane disaster, that whole, fiasco. But I think Biden basically was obsessed with this notion that he was the only one that got it right in Bosnia or in the former Yugoslavia, and that we can apply this same model to Iraq and it's going to give me a platform to talk as kind of the elder statesman who can heal the country after Bush and Cheney's lawlessness.
Can you talk about that Bosnia instance that you did write about? I mean, the former Yugoslavia, essentially how, I mean, that he wasn't supportive of intervening in a right-wing coup in Haiti, and yet he was incredibly supportive of basically intervening in the former Yugoslavia, and the justification for not intervening in Haiti was actually quite racist.
Yeah, I mean, look, the war in the former Yugoslavia is an incredibly complicated history. I spend a lot of time there. I speak the language, and I'm very familiar with the history and have friends in various countries. And it's a minefield for a Bosnian or Croat or Serb or Albanian to talk about these issues. But I'll give you my best assessment of it, Emma. First of all, on the issue of Haiti, Joe Biden is basically saying what we're seeing in Europe is a modern day genocide. This cannot stand. The United States must intervene militarily. We must bomb Belgrade's capital. We must defend the Bosnian Muslims against the horrifying genocide that is unfolding. Biden was one of the first politicians to call it a genocide. So he's staking out this really militaristic position on an admittedly horrifying bloodbath. Meanwhile, in Haiti, which is much closer to the United States, in its same hemisphere, is watching the overthrow of the democratically elected leftist government of Catholic priest Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And murderous death squads are just rampaging and murdering throughout Haiti. And you have huge protests among Haitian Americans demanding that the United States do something to reverse this right-wing death squad coup. Joe Biden is interviewed on Charlie Rose's show and asked about his conflicting positions on Bosnia and Haiti. And Biden, again, speaks bluntly and I think honestly from his perspective, and he says, no one cares about Haiti. Haiti could sink into the sea or rise up 300 feet and no one would care. It wouldn't affect the U.S. interest. So Biden, in that sense, was being honest, and I think that it tells you a lot about the way also that he views what nations are actually important. He kept repeating, Europe is important, Haiti isn't important. I mean, it's a disgraceful framing of it on Biden's part. But I think that, to not dwell so much on that one comparison and just to talk about Bosnia for a second, I think that Biden had genuine motivations that had to do with stopping what he perceived to be a genocide that was being led by the Bosnian Serbs. And he became obsessed with militarily destroying not just the Bosnian Serbs, but going after Serbia itself and bombing the capital of Serbia, despite the